The radical left are often accused of not loving their country, but it's the radical right who now seem to really hate the place that they live. Opposition to and even disgust towards multicultural Britain is now being expressed by right-wingers, complaining that Britain, a supposedly ancient and noble culture, has become the UK. Now, the UK, in this sort of concept, is spelt Y-O-O-K-A-Y. Now, the UK concept, it was developed on Twitter, mainly involves right-wingers sharing pictures of majority ethnic minority areas and businesses with an air of disapproval. So, they'll post a picture of a halal butcher's next to a chicken shop and say, "Oh God, this is the horrible multicultural UK aesthetic." It's also become a major talking point in right-wing outlets like The Critic and The Telegraph, where the idea has been endorsed by former Tory Minister David Frost. In that Telegraph piece from November, Frost describes the UK aesthetic, or what he calls the UK aesthetic, in the following way. The term was initially used to symbolise the particular aesthetic quality of much of the modern UK, that jarring mixture of cultures bolted onto the pre-existing British environment. The American candy store next to the kebab shop with its modern signage stuck onto a half-timbered building, the scattered line bikes and discarded Deliveroo bags slung wherever on the street, and the soundtrack of modern Britain, multicultural London English with its global slang, the drill music on the train without headphones. If you live in a city, you recognise it. Now, as you can probably tell, the UK argument is a fairly naked attempt to blame all of Britain's woes, be that poor housing, decrepit high streets, or even the existence of line bikes, on ethnic minorities. And GB News is the latest right-wing outlet to jump on the bandwagon. They released a documentary over the weekend called UK, so obviously spelled Y-O-O-K-A-Y, versus Britain, How Immigration Transformed a Nation.
Britain, an ancient place. It now has new sights, new smells, new sounds.
Stepped in the party, steady. The big back's on shake already.
Mama said don't cry no more. Mama said don't cry no more.
And even a new name.
The new name being UK. I mean, we're going to come back to this actually, but that intro, I think, speaks to a lot of the beef that these people have, which is not that, well, I mean, their beef is that there are too many immigrants in this country, but the argument seems to be that without immigrants, we would still be a rural kind of Anglo-Saxon society where we lived in castles and everyone was a shepherd. Not that that ever was the history, but sort of, that's what that intro is getting to. We used to have lovely fields with sheep and castles, and now we have butchers in Brixton. It's like, I'm not quite sure how the causality is working there. And the documentary did have many Alan Partridge-esque moments, including this.
In old Britain, culture meant Shakespeare and Elgar. In the UK, it's masked rappers, viral beefs, and beats soaked in violence.
You can't blame the fact that Elgar is no longer in the charts on black people, right? They simply didn't cause that to happen, right? Elgar lived 100 years ago, Shakespeare 400 years ago. This idea that, I mean, I don't want to be in a world where we just read Shakespeare and listen to Elgar. I mean, maybe that's what Steve Edgington wants. But whether or not you want it, the reason we don't have it has nothing to do with immigration, right? It wasn't immigrants that stopped us listening to Elgar. I don't know why he's missed out the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Sex Pistols. He's suddenly just gone from Elgar to drill music and there was nothing in between. So I think fairly humorous so far. But it's a clip from the documentary GB News shared on Twitter that has got the most pushback.
What does it mean to be British for you?
So obviously, like me being British, yeah, it's all good and yeah, because obviously, like I was born here, born in this country in 1997, the 20th of November 1997, and to me, yeah, it's South London. South London is my home innit, and obviously Stockwell, that I grew up going to, that it's my home as well innit. Stockwell, Clapham, Brixton as well is my home as well.
But what about Britain?
What Britain? Yeah, Britain's my home innit.
You like it?
Yeah. Since 27 years on this earth, yeah, it's been amazing, yeah, and obviously the things have changed for good.
I'm going to name some British legends from history, and I want you to respond what do you think of them? Alfred the Great, Winston Churchill, Lord Nelson, the Duke of Wellington. What do you think of these people?
Well, what I will say about these people is, they're just doing what they got to do.
What do you think are British values?
British values. It's a tricky one. Still, it's a tricky one, innit? It's a tricky one, innit? British values, yeah. Is this something to do with cost of living or something?
That was a really nice seeming guy, right? Who I don't think knew that he was being interviewed for a documentary which was trying to say multiculturalism ruined Britain. And then a supposed gotcha is that he didn't know who Alfred the Great is. And maybe I should be embarrassed to admit this, but I didn't know who Alfred the Great was, right? And I'm a white guy. My parents are British. I did PPE at Oxford, right? I don't drop this very often, right? But I did the most establishment degree you can ever do. Alfred the Great. I listened to history podcasts. I listened to The Rest is History, right? I listened to The Rest is for my sins. And I didn't actually know who Alfred the Great was. He was an Anglo-Saxon, I've looked it up today, he was an Anglo-Saxon king who didn't quite unify England, but who kind of got us some of the way there. I don't know, someone is going to be able to explain this better than me, who I sort of just looked this up this morning on Wikipedia. That video has been viewed over 7 million times on Twitter, but I think mainly because people don't like it. So there have been lots of people complaining about this, and they include people from the left and from the right. Rakib Ehsan, who regularly writes for The Telegraph and Spiked, so I think we can say he's somewhat on the right, said this. This was a failed gotcha attempt. The lad says Britain is his home and that his life has been amazing. Good on him. As for not having a clue about Alfred the Great and the Duke of Wellington, I suspect that would be the case for most young people across the ethnicities. I think that would be the case for most people in general across the ethnicities. I think Alfred the Great is not as famous as some people are suggesting. People who weighed in were also other GB News hosts. So Martin Daubney hosts their sort of weekday afternoon show. He says, to be fair, how many white kids would know about Alfred the Great? I know Brixton, this lad seems solid. I'd buy him a pint. What's the problem? And then it got worse for the documentary makers once the brother of the man interviewed gave some extra context. So he says, you've plastered this video all over your social media channels, taking advantage of my autistic older brother for views and to push your weird anti-black narrative. As a news company that should be responsible, this shouldn't have been posted, but oh, well. That got lots of people agreeing with that, basically. Steve Edgington, though, who made the film, doubled down by retweeting a bunch of pretty racist defenses of the film, including this. So someone called Harrison Pitt said, this gentleman seems like a nice chap. And this is, sorry, by the way, quoting the Rakib Ehsan tweet that I played you, or that I read to you earlier. It says, this gentleman seems like a nice chap, but Steve Edgington helps to show that he is anything but assimilated. And then it's, Huguenot-descended Brits are in all relevant respects invisible. Meanwhile, Edgington's interviewee associates Britain with its most conquered, colonised UK areas. Ehsan clearly cares nothing for this country's host people. Ehsan, by the way, is always writing about sort of integration, and often from a very small C conservative perspective. I think the fact that he is non-white has maybe caused Harrison Pitt to say that he cares nothing for this country's, or what he calls, host people. Helena, there's some pretty weird things going on the right at the moment, aren't there? I mean, we've talked about it a number of times on the show, but an attempt to bring back ethnic nationalism. So to sort of not just, I think, sort of push back against like multiculturalism as an ideology, but also multi-ethnicity in the sense of people not being white in Britain. They want to make that controversial again. And with some pretty sloppy arguments about how we used to read Shakespeare and listen to Elgar, and now we don't. What do you think is going on here?
Well, I'd first like to say that it's funny to me about the kind of people who are concerned about this, that the phrase they use is UK as if that's the way nobody pronounces it, like the Y-O-O-K-A-Y. That's just how you pronounce it, unless you're incredibly posh. Like, it's just saying UK. Like, Y-O-O-K-A-Y that's just the natural pronunciation of that word. So that's very funny to me. But I think you're right. It is a very specific part of the online right, especially, who really have kind of embraced ethno-nationalism quite heavily. Right now, it's obvious that there is plenty of concern in this country about immigration, whether it's about irregular or regular migration. It's hot on the topic of lots of people in this country, and most people have it as their second concern or third concern around about the NHS and cost of living being the top three, right? So to try and claim that things such as integration or the high levels of demographic change on at least some part of at least a large amount of voters' minds, right? But this very specific bent of ethnic nationalism that we've recently seen, this really isn't particularly popular. It really isn't, right? So the More in Common pollster did a survey. This was just after the riots had happened last year, by the way, about whether people felt proud, ashamed, or they didn't care about the fact that the UK is a multi-ethnic country. And 48% said they were proud, 45% said neither of those things, and only 7% said they were ashamed. So this really does seem to be a very, very tiny minority when you actually look at the wider population. And it really is like an online thing for a lot of right-wingers, right? Like you'll see that Rupert Lowe seems to be the kind of real figurehead in terms of politicians who really push ethno-nationalism. He's been very heavy in talking in explicitly ethno-nationalist terms on like his Twitter account. He gets huge numbers of retweets, huge numbers of likes, right? You must think he's very, very popular, but doesn't actually translate into real world success in terms of what the people of this country think. Well, no, Twitter isn't real life. And things reached a bizarre nadir where David Frost, like the Telegraph writer, who wrote that article that you quoted there, literally said, well, if you want to start learning about the UK phenomenon, you can follow this meme account on Twitter. And I'm like, well, at the time when you're trying to pin your ideological positions on Twitter meme accounts, I think we need to take a step back and take a look at what's going on here. When in reality, I think more what's close to the median position is kind of what Nigel Farage was saying in the run-up to the election, or just after the election, which was that actually, he said, immigration previously had been good. He praised, for example, the Windrush generation, which are the kind of people being slandered, in my mind, in my opinion here, by GB News in terms of the way in which they're portraying this stuff. He said, well, they were good. They came over to help build our country, right? It's only the mass migration recently that's been a problem because it helps slow down integration. No, I don't believe this is the case. That's not my particular position on this issue. I think the median consensus on this is slightly skewed by media reporting, but I can understand why they have those concerns. And that's way far away from the kind of ethno-nationalism that you're getting from people from GB News and from people like Rupert Lowe, in my opinion. So if Nigel Farage can understand this, but the rest of the people who he works with, these are his colleagues over at GB News, are so vastly out of step with public opinion. Like, it shows you just how kind of insular a lot of this stuff really is, because Farage is somebody who tries to pin himself to what he thinks is median opinion to try and garner votes, right? He doesn't think this ethno-nationalism is particularly useful for Reform UK's party brand. Probably that had some reason as to why there was such a campaign to get rid of Rupert Lowe from the party, because he only appeals to the headbangers and wingnuts, which are, again, in my mind, from what I've seen here, part of this online echo chamber. And one thing I would like to end on here is just a bit of a personal rant that really kind of got me, is the idea that somehow the fact that we have new kinds of fusion music in this country because of people arriving part of the Windrush generation or their children listening to grime or drill or dubstep or whatever it is, as this is somehow like, oh, no one listens to any of the old composers anymore. Would you think people in France are still listening to Camille Saint-Saëns in their going about their daily life? Of course they aren't. Fact is, in music culture in this country, there's been a huge amalgamation of our colonial past, for example, even far back as the Beatles, where people like this would consider a national treasure, were people who embraced things like the sitar and ragas from their time, engaging with people like Ravi Shankar, and that kind of cultural kind of cross-pollination is something that is so excellent about the kind of multi-ethnic and multicultural countries, and the wants to engage with different cultures as well, right? And that makes our country richer, not poorer. And the fact that these people are, again, as far as I said, is snooty, but the fact that they think that drill and grime music, which I think from lots of different perspectives has lots of artistic merit to it, is somehow completely devoid of merit. Again, as far as I can see, just for racist reasons, because it's the kind of music that ethnic minorities like to listen to, a lot of white people like it as well, by the way, is it shows to me that this is essentially, a lot of this is about racism, snobbery, and quite frankly, a bunch of completely baseless nostalgia, which doesn't even get any merit in terms of the previous country that we used to live in anyway. End of rant.